Hari Om. We have just started the fifth chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Karma Sanyasa Yoga. The concept of Karma Sanyasa Yoga is profoundly relevant today because these teachings are centering around the practical way to stay fully engaged in all realms of our life. That includes social, family, and professional responsibilities without sacrificing anything. Gita as a Shastram never asks anybody to run away from the duties. The whole crux of the Shastram is know yourself, knowing that reality you live in this world. So as a concept, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, action over renunciation. When you say action over renunciation, it is not about abandoning the actions. It is not about renunciation of the worldly duties. It is all about renouncing the ego, renouncing the ego driven expectations that basically creates stress in all of us, that creates limitations in all of us, that creates the blocker for anybody to grow in life. So action over renunciation is all about not abandoning the worldly duties. It's all about renouncing the ego driven expectation that creates hurdles for anybody to realize this truth. And second bigger aspect this theme brings is basically the overcoming the dependence on outcomes. Instead of being paralyzed by the need for specific results, just focus on the duties and do the best. Based on your ability, you do the best. Because you focus in the process. So that when we focus on the process, that will naturally neutralize the amount of stress that we will have towards the outcome, or thinking too much about the outcome will get neutralized when one focuses to the best in terms of executing the work. Not only that, again, the stress related to the external factors, the comparisons, the contrasting, all those things will get over when we focus on the process of the work rather than depending on the outcome. There is also a logic, because things which are not in our control, what will happen? What would be the output? So there is no control with us. So that is why it says overcoming the outcome dependence. Instead of getting disturbed on what would happen, you just focus on the duties, do the best based on your ability, based on the capability. That will naturally neutralize the amount of stress, the amount of dependence on the outcome. Let the outcomes happen. So don't have a sluggish attitude or a laid back attitude. You focus on the process of executing the action, right? And the equanimity, that is the biggest aspect when you say karma sannyasa yoga. In fact, we have seen this coming above the dualities. While we do the process of execution, it is quite evident that the results can become favorable or unfavorable. So when we think too much about the results, then it is quite obvious that we will get affected by the dualities. So have a balanced life when faced with with this kind of scenarios. What are those scenarios? Dualities, dvandvam meaning success, failure, right? Praise or criticism, profit or loss, all these dualities. So what that means actually, it is not something like you don't care. It is not like that. It's all about cultivating the acceptance. In the second chapter, we have seen the prasada buddhi. So having a balanced life, that is where Karma Yogam says you surrender. You dedicate everything to me. You just focus on the execution. You are the nimittam to execute. So you just focus on the process of execution. The onus is on me to give the results. That's what Bhagavan says. And you cannot have a control on that. So what is the real meaning? Cultivate the acceptance, or cultivating acceptance, so called as the prasada buddhi. So why these three aspects are dominant when it comes to the karma sannyasa yoga? Because transformation is the intention. Transformation is all about what? From the egocentric motivation on results, and ensuring that one acts for the sake of action. One acts for the sake of action, meaning one should be free from the cognitive and emotional resources that will get applied. When I say cognitive and emotional resources that get applied, meaning thinking too much about the results. Thinking too much about the results. And also the ego that will come into the play in terms of taking the ownership, taking the agency. So instead of all these things, you just focus on the process of execution. It means what? You will be able to do the best. Process of execution meaning what? You just stay in the present. Don't shift the timeline to the future and thinking about the results. What would happen? Whether it will be success or failure. We have seen this in the second chapter. Buddhi yuktho jahadiha ubhe sugrata dushkrade tasmat yogaya ujjasva yoga karma sugaushal. So that is called as the skillfulness. Skillfulness is what? Attention to the task. Skillfulness is what? Single-mindedness, the focus. Yogaha karmasu kaushalam. What is the kushalata? Again, awareness in the action. You stay in the present. And you be indifferent to the Ubhe sukrita dushkride tasmad yogaya ujjasva. So don't too much worry about jayam, parajayam, labham, nashtam, all those things, right? You focus, you have the single-mindedness, you have the attention to the task, you should have the awareness in the action. Much beyond that, be non-judgmental while we execute the work. Because it's very important. Non-judgmental meaning because we all have the tendency to have the preconceived notions. So that is where Bhagavan says you relinquish the attachment to the results to me, so that you will not get into the process of judging the results of the action. Is it good or bad? Will I succeed or fail? You just focus on doing, you just focus on the execution. So in our last session, we saw the confusion that Arjuna has between what? Between the Sanyasam and the Karma Yogam. Sanyasa Yogam and Karma Yogam. So here, in fact, Bhagavan says that the true sannyasi is one who is free from the likes and dislikes. We have seen this. Jnaya sa nitya sannyasi yo na dveshti na kankshati nirdvando hi mahabaho sugham bandhat pramuchyate. Whatever we discussed is covered in this verse. A nitya sannyasi, who is a nitya sannyasi? This one who is always a renunciate is the one who doesn't have the hatredness, na kankshati, does not long, nirdvandam, and free from the opposites. Such a person will effortlessly be released from the bondage. Sukham bandhad pramuchyate. So a true sannyasi is one who is free from the likes and dislikes. In one way we can say karma kushalata. We just discussed. You be in the present, you don't prejudge things. So here the important aspect is this sannyasam is not something like you getting into a new lifestyle, wear some clothes. Na kashayam, na bundanam. So it is not about wearing the kashayam or wearing or having the mundanam. Obviously, we discussed this. There are two paths of sannyasa: Vidvat sannyasam and the Vividisha sannyasam. So here, it is very clear for all of us, not running away from life is sannyasa. That is the clarity that Bhagavan is bringing to all of us through Arjuna. So here Arjuna asks, tell me very much conclusively that which path is better, whether the path of knowledge, the path of renunciation, or the path of action. The path of action meaning the Karma Yoga or the Jnana Yoga, which one is better? So that is where Bhagavan says both paths will lead to the liberation. In fact, in our last session, we started with the concept of active life and the liberation. One side is the active life, and other one is basically the freedom that we all are looking for. And the nature of the consciousness is perfection, is freedom. And we operate between these two ends. And the mind is there. And for that mind to get the knowledge, what is that knowledge? That knowledge is all about I cannot be the mind, I am not the mind, I am not the body, I am not the intellect, I am not the senses. I am the true consciousness. Janmadhyasya yadonvayadi idaradasya artheshu avijnasarat. Anadi, that consciousness, the true nature of the self is the perfection. So one side, the perfection which is dictating the jiva to attain that. This is the true nature, but the mind is not allowing because the mind is constantly connected to the outside world. So what has to happen is basically every jivan, every creation ultimately has to attain that liberation or that perfection. Right? This is the ultimate goal for any jiva. So if that is the case, freedom is the one which everybody is expecting. Then it is very clear that the freedom is not where one live. It is completely dependent upon how one lives, how one lead a life. Correct. So it is very clear that, very much clear that active life and freedom. And here Bhagavan says you have the active life but ultimately aim for the freedom. So that is where how to achieve the freedom while we are doing the active life. Simple renunciation of the agency, so that ultimately the mind will become more and more pure. The mind will be able to see the truth behind it, so that we will drift from one side to the other side. Doesn't mean that we will run away from the active life. So here in the verse 3, Nyayasa nitya sanyasi yo na dveshti na kankshati nirdvando hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchyate. Sanyasa was a quality of a renunciate who is free from the raga dvesham, who is free from the likes and dislikes, and should be an eternal sannyasi, eternal renunciate. Whether a householder or a monk, it doesn't matter. So that's where Bhagavan says both paths, the path of Sankhya meaning the path of knowledge, and the path of action, the yoga of action, so called as the karma yoga, are not two different paths, not two different roads. They are the same road, but the only problem is seen from two ends. And the people who doesn't have this clarity will only think it as a different path. They are not different paths, they are the same. So the wise will see it as one. And Nitya Sannyasi, before we start today's slokam, the Nitya Sannyasi, what is the Nitya Sannyasa meaning? The one who operates from the core, one who always have got the understanding of the true self. And what is that understanding? The true self as the unmanifestable, unchangeable, unthinkable reality. In Chadusloki Bhagavatam, we can see Bhagavan Sarva Bhudanam Adhiksho Avasthido Guham. And the Anvaya Vidirega Bhavam, it is not consciousness is not a part or a product. It is not an object, it is the subject. And there is no connection between the consciousness and the subject in terms of the existence. For the consciousness to exist, there is no need of an object. There is no need of any manifestation to be there. So the one who has got understanding of the true self as unmanifestable, unthinkable, unchangeable reality is a Nitya Sannyasi. And this has to be the dominant thought. Whether it's a Grihasthasrami or a Sannyasi, this understanding should be there. And for a Sannyasi, for a person who directly jumps into the Sannyasam, is having this knowledge. And if there are no karmam or karma vasanas to be cleared or executed, no problem, they don't need to go through the path of a Grihasthasrami. Whereas a Grihasthasrami's case is what? The urge is there to gain this self-knowledge. That's why Bhagavan says this is the real good path, because you go with this. Ultimately, the aim is to gain this knowledge. So, what is the ultimate aim? Ultimate aim is basically getting this knowledge and living in this knowledge. Okay? So, these paths are not separate. It all depends upon from where you see. Verse number 4. Sankhya yogo pruthak bala prabadandi na pandita egamapyastida samyak ubhayor vindade bhalam. Sankhya yogo pruthak bala prabadandi na pandita egamapyastida samyak ubhayor vindade bhalam. Sankhya yogo pruthak bala. So what is the meaning? Sankhya yogo pruthak bala. The Sankhya meaning what? The knowledge, and yogam here meanings the karma yoga. The are different for bala. Bala in this case is somebody who is not having that maturity. It is not literally like, I mean, you cannot say it's children, right? We can for the sake of understanding, we can use that for the immature or for small children. They may treat the Sankhyam and Karma Yogam as separate, whereas Prabadandi na Pandita, not the wise, they will never think like that. Egam abhi astida samyak. Even one, the samyak, properly, not different. Ubhayo vindade phalam. So ultimately, the immature ones only will see these two as different paths. The Sankhya, meaning the Jnana Yogam, and the Karma Yogam are distinct. Okay, so what is really needed? Renunciation of ego in action and giving up our anxieties for the enjoyment of fruits of action. And in both paths, these aspects are there. What are the aspects? Renunciation of the ego in action and giving up the anxieties for the enjoyment of the fruits of action. In both paths, these two aspects are needed. So both renunciation of action, when we say renunciation of action, please don't understand that it's renunciation of or renunciation of the action itself. It is not renunciation of action. Renunciation of the ego in action. It is not giving up the action. It is basically giving up the ego in action. And performance of action. Performance of action meaning what? It's karma yoga. Both will lead to freedom. And that's what Bhagavan said. For you, I am prescribing the path of action because that is superior. That is easily doable. You can easily do that. And the plane of experience reached by a Jnana Yogi, a Sankhyan, is also gained by the Karma Yogi. As a proof, we can go back to the 3rd chapter and see the 3rd verse. Lokasmin dividha nishta pura prokta maya naka jnana yogena sankhyanam karma yogena yoginam. So it means what? The experience that is ultimate, where a jnana yogi or a karma yogi will reach, will be same. That experience will be experienced, that truth will be experienced by both karma yogi and a Sankhyan or a Jnana yogi. So the people who looks from the surface, when we for this verse, the explanation is basically the Pradak Bala Prabhadandina Pandita. The people who look at the surface level may see these differences. But the deep practitioners, the people who are having this idea, having this clarity, will always see the unity. So basically the explanation of this verse is 3rd chapter, 3rd verse. Dividohi, or from a Sruti, Dividohi Vedokto Nishta Pravarti Lakshano Nivarti Lakshana. Or in another way, this is the verse, the third verse of the Karma Yogam. Logesmin Divida Nishta Pura Prokta Mayanaka Sankhya Yogena, Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yogina. So two paths are same only. Let's see the analogy of two groups who are going to climb the same peak. So one group said climbing from the base camp from the south is good. The other group says from the north is good because it is more conducive to climb. Each group, they have their own ideologies, because from south is good. Other one says from the north is good, easy to trek. Okay, so ultimately, they go with their ideology. They are convinced because they have their own reasons. And ultimately, what will happen? They will go in their own way, and both will reach to the summit. Once they reach the summit, nobody will argue that my route is correct, my path was correct. Anymore, they will debate. So the debate would have existed at the base camp, but it dissolves at the summit. So yoga leads to Sankhya. Yoga is a path, and Sankhya is the goal. Sankhya is what? Sankhya is the knowledge. So becoming a yogi in life is important, because yoga ultimately leads to Sankhya. And yoga is a path. If you go back to the 4th chapter, Bhagavan says this, I gave this knowledge to Vivaswan, Manu, Ikshvaku, and over a period of time, the deterioration happened in the lineage. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu sakalene hamahada yogo nashta parandava. So, living in the yogic way, yogam is the real path. So, what is the ultimate thing? Knowledge. Jnana prapti is the final aim. So, whether you start with the Sankhya or the Karma Yogam, ultimately both will come to the same goal. So, the ultimate assurance Bhagavan Krishna is giving to all of us is Grahasthasrami can also be a Nitya Sanyasi. Grahasthasrami can also be a Nitya Sanyasi. In Srimad Bhagavata, in the 11th chapter, Ekadasha Skandha, Uddhava says, Yogesha, Yoga Vinyasa, Yogatman, Yoga Sambhava, Nisreyasaya me Proktastyaga Sanyasa Lakshana. So, Uddhava calls Bhagavan Krishna as Yogesha, Yoga Vinyasa, Yoga Atma, Yoga Sambhava, Nisreyasaya me Proktastyaga Sanyasa Lakshana. So here, in the Bhagavad Gita also we can see at the end, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, correct? So you alone bestow the results of yoga, and out of your kindness, you distribute the perfection of yoga to your devotees. That's where Bhagavan says in the 4th chapter, I gave this, imam vivasvade yogam proktavanaham avyayam, vivaswan manave praha, manarikshvagave abravid. Right? So I gave this knowledge from the beginning. And now I give the same knowledge to you, Arjuna. So here Uddhava says to Krishna that you bestow the results of yoga, and through your kindness you distribute the perfection of yoga to all devotees. And you are the supreme soul who realized through the yoga. That's why Bhagavan is called as Yogeshwaran. And you are the origin of all powers. And now you have explained the path of renunciation characterized by Yogatman, Yoga Sambhava, Nishreyasayame, Praktastyaga, Sanyasa Lakshana. So the path of renunciation characterized by Sanyasa. So now, not only that, but later Uddhava says that the renunciation is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult for whom? Not for all. Extremely difficult for the ones who still are attached to the sense gratification and devoid of devotion. Two things are needed. Still living in the active path only, the active life scenario, not having a bhakti to know the truth. For them, the people who are completely attached to the sense gratification and devoid of devotion. In Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see in the 11th canto, the Avaduta Gita, the 24 gurus. We'll see this at some point. And there Uddhava says, Tyagam is basically dushkaram. Tyagam is dushkaram for the people who cannot give up, or people who are completely attached to the sense gratification, and the one who are not having bhakti. So their minds are disturbed because they are occupied with the sense gratification and they don't have the devotion. So for them, giving up the material enjoyment is very tough. For them, the renunciation is extremely difficult. That's where in the Vedantam, two things are needed. Vairagyam and bhakti. Three things. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, you can see bhakti, jnanam, vairagya. Three things are needed. Vairagyam is what? Vairagyam is basically having attachment to that truth, having attachment to that God, having more connect to that reality rather than on the sense objects and the world. So people who are completely absorbed in the sense gratification is difficult. Second is what? If they don't have bhakti, and jnanam comes as a part of the bhakti and vairagyam. Bhaktya jnanam prajayate. So renunciation is extremely difficult without the yoga. So what is the path? Yogam is the path. And both yogam leads to the same goal, whether you are a Sankhyan or a Karma Yogi, both will lead to the same path. But what is really needed? Renunciation is needed, bhakti is needed. Verse number 5. Yet Sankhya prapyate sthanam tad yogaira vigamyate egam Sankhyam cha yogam cha yapashyati sapashyati. Yet Sankhya prapyate sthanam tad yogairapi gamyate egam Sankyam cha yogam cha yaha pashyati sa pashyati. So, what is the meaning here? Yat sankhya prapyate sthanam. By the sannyasis, prapyate sthanam is gained. Tat yoge abhigamyate egam sankyam, as one knowledge and karma yoga sees, he sees the truth. The state reached by the followers of knowledge is also reached by the followers of action. Basically, the state, the experience is same for the one who starts with the knowledge or the one who starts with the action. And one who truly sees Sankhya and Yoga as one, that person, he or she alone truly sees. Ya pashyati sa pashyati. So the highest spirituality can be that here and now, in the middle of work, in the middle of everything, in the middle of family, in the middle of your life, the mind getting attuned to the attitude of yoga. The emphasis is not on where you stay, where you live. Emphasis is on how we train our mind, how we shape our mind. So, if one is not equipped to balance the active life and freedom, then they will stagnate in life. When one is fully onto the active life, one is fully onto the world, they will stagnate. They will undergo the samsaram. So, what is stagnation? Stagnation in life is becoming a samsari. So, stagnation is the stage where there is no scope for nivarti, there is no scope for liberation. And where is the liberation? Liberation is basically in the inner plane, liberation is in the mind. Where is nivarti? Nivarti is within us. So when the path of nivarti will happen, when the mind understands that there is a principle in this jiva, in me, which is beyond the time and space, beyond the actions and thoughts, then the mind surrendering to that truth, right? So there is a principle which is beyond time and space in me, that itself is so called as the vairagyam. And now the mind surrendering to that truth is called bhakti. So what is the ultimate aim? Knowledge. So you can have active life plus liberation, because the consciousness in all of us, the nature of that truth is demanding the nivritti. And as a first step, do the purification of the mind, antakarana shuddhi. For what? For neutralizing the raga, dvesha, kartrutva, bhoktrutvam, to neutralize the false sense of doership, to neutralize the the enjoyership, ragam, dvesham, kartrutvam, bhoktrutvam, to remove the agency here, to attain that perfection which is our own true nature. Clear? Verse number 6. Sanyasastu mahabaho dukkhamaptumayogada yoga yukto munir brahma najirenadi. Sanyasastu mahabaho. So I think in this book it is wrong. Mahabaho. I think it's not mahabaho, it's mahabaho. So sanyasastu mahabaho. So the renunciation of action, whereas Arjuna dukkham aptum ayogadha. So it is difficult aptum. So for the ones where the mind is not purified. The renunciation attempted before the mind is purified is going to be a problem, because it's going to be a trap. That is what it is. Because if the mind is not purified and if you stop the action, the mind will not get calm. That's what Bhagavan also says to Arjuna. You leaving the war field, you leaving the battlefield and running away will not give the peace of mind, because the mind is not calm. The mind will still think further. So the mind will, though it is not doing any physical action, but the mind is full with the actions. So the mind has to reach to a state of actionlessness. And karma yoga is the training ground that makes the real renunciation. Through action itself, you get into the state of actionlessness, so that the mind will become pure. Meaning what? The ego will go, the attachment to the results will go. So basically, this answers the question that Arjuna asked. Why can't I skip and directly jump into the knowledge? Why can't I directly jump into the renunciation, run away? Why can't I save the trouble of action and directly go into the renunciation? What is the answer? I hope you all are with me. Before the mind is purified, cannot jump into that, because the mind will not be calm. And the mind has to be calm to get this knowledge. So through karma yogam, get into the aspect of renouncing the ego, renouncing the attachment to the results, gradually, and ultimately you will be able to equip that knowledge. The mind will be able to equip that knowledge. So here, yoga yuktan, yoga yukto munir brahma najirenadi gachadi. So who is the yoga yuktan? Committed to the life of a karma yoga. Again, you be a yogi. Bhagavan always says this. Who is a yoga yuktan? The one whose mind has settled in the self, undisturbed by the desires. So the mind absorbs the silence of the inner being. Whose mind is settled in that self, that mind will always be connected to that self, so that the external disturbances will not get affected in that mind. So purity of mind is a prerequisite for gaining that knowledge. Got it? So what is really needed? The purity of mind. How the purity of mind will happen? Purity of mind will happen through executing the karma yoga. What will happen when we do the karma yoga? Through gradual process, the mind will be able to come out of the ego and the distractions that are created by the external world. Okay, so ultimately, knowledge is the goal. And so the difference, this is beautifully explained by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Ramakrishna Devan says, when you are in the world and when you have duties to execute, hold on to God with one hand and you work with the other hand. So when you are in the world and you have duties to execute, you hold to God on with one hand, and the other hand you do or you use it for doing the work, you execute. So this is the definition of Karma Yoga by Ramakrishna Devan. And for the others, when there is no work to execute, you hold both hands to, you hold on to the God with both hands. And this is called as the Sankhya Yoga. So in both scenarios, please understand that there is awareness of the self. That is why you are holding one hand to the God, onto the Lord. But whereas you have the prarabdham to execute, you are a grahasthasrami, and that path is also very, very, vishishta. It's shrestha. So you are always having the companion. One hand is always connected to the God. So what is sannyasam? Awareness of the self. That is sannyasam. So in order to have that awareness, the issue is basically the ego and desires are basically obstructing this awareness. So what we have to do? Through Karma Yogam, with this connection, ensure that our inner layers are cleansed, our inner layers are purified. So what is sannyasam? Sannyasam is all about awareness of the self and gaining or rediscovery or recognizing one's real nature. The one's nature of the self is called as sannyasam. Verse number 7. Yoga yukto vishuddhatma vijidatma jidendriya sarva bhudatma bhudatma kurvannavi na lipyate. Who is the one which is not affected, the one who is committed to the Karma Yoga, Yoga Yukta, Vishuddhatma, whose mind is purified, Vijidatma, who has mastered the body, Jidendriya, the one who has mastered the senses, Sarva Bhuda Atma Bhuda Atma, meaning one who knows oneself to be the self in all beings. The one who has got the understanding that the self is same, that my self is the self for everything. Kurvan api na lipyade, while doing actions, they will never get affected. Who will never get affected? The one whose mind is purified by being committed to a life of a karma yogi. One who has mastered the body, one who has mastered the organs, one who knows that the self is the self of all beings. Such a person is not affected even while doing actions. Na lipyade. So yoga yuktan meaning what? One who is engaged in selfless action, one who is engaged in karma yoga. Vishuddhatma, one who is free from the negative tendencies of mind, one who has got the purified mind. Vijidatma, one who has mastered the senses, away from the body doing unwanted karmas due to the sensory pull. Jidendriya, the one who has got mastery over the senses, senses, body and mind. Sarva Bhudatma Atma, the self is the one which is everywhere. Self leads to see the same self in every being. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adihave Muhyandi Yatsureya, as per Srimad Bhagavat. The Lord who is residing in the heart of the Guru, and the same Lord is residing in the heart of the Shishya, is hearing. So that is where Sarva Bhudatma Bhudatma, the self leads to see the same self in every being. So what is important? Purity of mind is a prerequisite. That is the prerequisite. That is the pre-qualification. So that the body, mind, intellect, senses are under control for the knowledge to happen. And the knowledge is all about the self, and that self is only one, that self is non-dual, that self is the truth of all beings, that self is the consciousness. So through this process, the knowledge will happen, the discovery will happen, the recognition will happen. So while the process of mental cleansing, the sense of doership will go, the notion of doership will go, will not get affected by the karma, and will be able to channelize the what are the aspects, the physical, intellectual, mental and sensory energies, right? Why I'm saying this, intellectual, physical, mental and sensory energies, because with this clarity, with the pure mind, one will be able to reduce the psychological distance. Meaning what? Or we can say, not psychological, maybe the physiological distance, the gaps between you and others. I think psychological distance is apt here, so that you will have inclusivity, you will have connectivity. That's where here the term Vishuddhatma, Vijidatma, Yoga Yukto Vishuddhatma, Vijidatma. The one who has got the mental purity will be able to remove the gap between that person and others. Then the social distance. For example, when I say social distance, seeing the members in the family or even out of the family as in the Brahma Bhava. Sarva Bhudatma Bhudatma. Able to see the, be able to see everybody as a part of the Brahma Bhava. Then the temporal distance. For example, not getting drifted to the future, not worrying too much about the future. That is where it says kurvan nabi na lipyade, not getting affected by the work while executing the actions. So the psychological distance, social distance, temporal distance, and the experiential distance. Experiential distance meaning the results and imaginations, they all are nullified to zero. Not worrying too much about what will happen, not imagining too much, not worrying too much on the results. So all these four distances will go: social distance, temporal distance, the psychological distance, the experiential distance. Means what? Where pure mind is a favorable disposition to know this reality, for getting equipped with the knowledge. Clear? Next two verses together. Naiva kinjit karomidi yukto manyate tattvavid. Naiva kinjit karomidi yukto manyeda tattvavid pashyan shrinvan sprishan jikhran ashnan gachan soban shasan pralaban visrujan grannan unmishan nimishan nabi indriyan indriyartheshu vartanda idi dharayan. Naiva kinjit karomi idi yukto manyeda tattvavid. The tattvavid, the one who knows the truth, will see that Pashyan Srinvan Sprishan Jikra. Pashyan meaning seeing, Srinvan meaning hearing, Sprishan meaning touching, Jikran meaning smelling, Ashnan meaning eating, Gachan meaning moving, Soban is sleeping, Shwasan is breathing, Pralaban talking, Visrujan giving up, Grannan accepting, Unmishan Nimishan opening and closing of the eyes, Indriyani indriyartheshu, organs in their objects are engaged. So the one who is a tattvavid, the knower of truth, while seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, all these things, knows that I am not doing anything. All the senses that are acting in relation to the sense objects are working in tandem. So the real self is not the doer. Our question, the Arjuna's dilemma is basically renunciation versus action. Bhagavan Krishna clearly says that both practically are same, but for you the karma yoga is superior than the renunciation. And what is really important is three aspects: the vairagyam, bhakti, and jnana. These two paths will lead to the same truth. That's what we have seen in these two verses. The real self is not doing anything. The knowledge of that self, the nature of that self, will start, or you start getting that understanding when the mind is clear. So irrespective of both paths, the goal is clear. You don't need to worry about that, Arjuna. But for you, karma yoga is superior. It is easy for you to start, sustain. It's a good starting point. In both paths, the true renunciation should happen. The freedom from likes, dislikes should happen in both paths. So you just focus on that. Sankhya, the knowledge path, and the yoga, the action path, will reach to the same destination. But whereas renunciation without the prior karma yoga is difficult. If the mind is not equipped, it is very difficult. Because you cannot drop everything, because the mind will not sit idle. The mind has to undergo the purification, and that purification should happen through the real karma yoga. Otherwise, the idle mind will create frustrations or produce frustrations, and ultimately the ultimate goal of freedom will not happen. So here in this verse, pralaban visarjan grannan unmission nimission nabi indriyan indriyarteshu vartanti iti dharayan. So the one who knows the real actor is untouched while acting. Irrespective of all these things happening, the real actor is untouched. So what is the ultimate aim? Have a purified mind, have self-mastery, have sense-control, see the self within and see the self as the self of every being, act without bondage. Whatever path you do or you take, it's okay. See, for example, a judge who is fair and who, does the job in a court irrespective of a friend or an enemy, will never have any attachment. What that judge will see is basically what is right, what is dharma. Right? There is no distinction between mine and other. Similarly, the one who has got the mental purity and clarity will not be biased with the worldly pulls, will not be biased between mine and others. And ultimately, the tattvavid, the one who has got the understanding of the self, understands that the self is not doing all because the ego is doing. Senses along with the sense objects are doing this, seeing, eating, walking, etc. whereas the true self is not the doer. So, in practice, in the reality, our ego says that I am doing. Ego, with its wrong understanding, it says that I am doing. What happens? Obviously, the bondage will start, the bondage will begin. And with the right knowledge, with the right traits in the mind, wisdom will come, and wisdom will say that these things are happening through me. As Ramakrishna Deva says, that you hold one hand, so you have all the connect with that God. So that God is taking me through. God is acting through me. God is working with me. Then the real freedom will kick in. That's what our Shastram says, and these verses are profoundly saying that knowing this will kick in or will bring the freedom in all of us. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Shanti Shanti Shanti.